I'm bored. Guess I'll check my email. Bandai Namco? What's this?
Oh, rise now, ye tarnished.
The announcement of Elden Ring Nightrein at the 2024 Game Awards was absolutely one of the, quote, holy shit moments Jeff Keighley promised us in the lead up to the show. A FromSoft Souls game built from the ground up for co-op for the first time ever, with bosses and enemies from the entire Soulsborne, Sekiro, whatever we're calling it now, series. And then the Nameless King and the Firekeeper from Dark Souls 3 show up. Sign me up. You had my curiosity, now you have my attention. But the question we all asked was, is this just an asset flip, or will they actually cook? As well as the elephant in the room here.
Fortnite.
I had the incredible opportunity to participate in the network test for this game on Valentine's weekend, and I can confirm they did in fact cook. Speaking of, anyone else find it hilarious that the network test for a game and a franchise that constantly reminds its players they get no bitches released on Valentine's Day? Just me? Alright, must be coincidence then. Anyway, let's get into it. Before we get too far into this video, I have to give you a disclaimer here. I sadly don't have any of my personal footage to show you because A, I don't own a capture card, B, they disabled the internal recording feature of the PlayStation 5, and C, Bandai Namco technically asked us not to share and record footage, even though everybody did anyway. So you get questionable pictures I took on my phone, if that, some trailer footage, but this is mainly going to be a talking head video. If you'd like to support the channel directly so I can get things like a capture card, better mics, new hardware, buy new games, or commission things like these sick avatars I had made for the boys, I've created a Patreon. Link is in the description. However, your viewership is quite enough for me. Back to the discussion at hand, I, like many of you, was quite skeptical of what exactly this Nightrein was going to be. Then I did some research and found out the game director, Junya Ishizaki, I'm terribly sorry, Japan, was the combat director for Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring, and probably more credits I'm forgetting or don't have time to list. And in a game that's almost entirely combat focused, this is perfect. From the minute you drop into this world on your giant spectral hawks, you hit the ground running, killing, and gathering any and everything you see. You can kind of control these hawks as they drop you, but not really. And it seems to be pretty random where they drop you. During the test, they did drop us off in the same place a few times, only because it was two maps that weren't fully random. We'll get to that later. They do seem to put all three players in about the same area, which is expected, because other than the necessity to never stop moving and gathering levels, souls, etc., the most important thing to succeed in this is staying with your team, unless you've got a true Dark Souls god with you. For most of the beta test period, password matchmaking with your friends was broken, so it matchmade us with randos. Joining a game was pretty quick. I think I waited maybe a minute tops to get into a match. Had a couple runs where my teammates DC'd as we loaded in, so I got to see how the game would feel solo, and while it felt okay, it felt much better with 3 people or the one run where there were only 2 of us. FromSoftware claimed this game is balanced entirely for solo play or trios, and in later test windows, groups of 2 would be matched with a random. Given how heavily skewed the gameplay loop and bosses are towards multiple people, this makes sense. I would describe the gameplay loop loosely as FromSoftware meets a battle royale, but since every character starts out with some gear, it's really more akin to an extraction shooter with the closing circle mechanic that narrows you in on a specific area of the map to fight a final boss at the end of each day. Each character will always start with the same set of abilities, which are unique to their class, and you do not manage armor, rings, or anything. All you do is change your weapons, of which you can hold 6, 3 in each hand, and 4 consumable slots. You can get more of these later on as you progress, but I typically only ever bothered with the 4. In Round Table Hold, there's a practice room now where you could test out weapons, and it looks to me like pretty much everything from Elden Ring is here, with maybe even a few new additions or things that were so obscure in the base game and DLC that I haven't ever used or heard of it. There's a lot. The game uses the standard Battle Royale looter shooter tiering system of common, uncommon, rare, and legendary, colored in a scheme that will be familiar to people who play those games. Being able to use higher rarities of weapon is tied directly to your level. For example, I used the Tree Sentinel Halberd in one run, which was considered a rare weapon and required me to be level 9 before I could use it. Commons and uncommons seem to have randomized Ashes of War, so it's worth comparing them even if a chest or boss drops you the same item you currently have, which the game lets you do through a pretty simple interface that highlights what each weapon has, what its Ash of War does, and what its passives do when you go to pick it up. Even boss weapons and legendary weapons from the base game are here, like the Blasphemous Blade, Godslayer, Great Sword, etc. Bleed damage remains the optimal way to deal with bosses with the bloated health pools, and I even saw a few cheeky little Hoarfrost Stomp users, and it didn't look as bad as it currently is in the base game. Shout out to my homies who played Elden Ring on launch and remember that bullshit. The network test build had 4 playable classes. First being a Wilder, who is the poster boy and the guy you get a statue of if you buy the collector's edition. He has a great sword, a small parrying shield, and is just kind of your jack-of-all-trades vanilla guy. His abilities were a Sekiro-style grapple to pull himself towards enemies, and it did a little bit of damage when you hit them with it. And his ultimate ability is a close-range stun blast, which staggers enemies briefly and does some damage. It's also got the crispiest kaboom sound I've ever heard in my life. His passive is he can cheat death one time by negating otherwise lethal damage. Next, we have the Guardian, Funny Bird Man. He's basically your tank. He starts with a giant shield he can bash with and a halberd, has the most HP and poise of all the characters. His abilities are a whirlwind storm strike that launches small enemies into the air, kind of like those big knights in Stormvale Castle, and the dive we saw in the trailers, where he flies into the air and slams down, doing some AoE damage and creating a small area of protection for allies that can be most optimally used to revive them in a pinch. Next we have the Recluse, Big Titty Magic Chick. Starts off with a simple staff that can cast Glintstone Arrow in the AoE slash sorcery that I forget the name of. She was definitely the most complex of the classes, and my least favorite to play, but probably only because I have a smooth brain and lack the wrinkles to understand what all of her abilities do properly at the current time. She fills up a meter based on elemental damage, and once you've filled it up 3 times, she can cast a big AoE spell. The one I ended up being able to pull off was a big fire chaos storm-esque attack, which was cool, but Unga Bunga caveman brain over here just wants to bonk things with swords. Her ultimate was I think Hunter's Mark from D&D, that you could pick an enemy that you were targeting, and I think your allies would do more damage to it. I'm not really sure about this one, but it seems cool, and I'm sure she's probably going to end up being broken AF in some way. The final class available in the network test, and my personal favorite, the Duchess, or Lady Maria mixed with Dark Souls 3 Firekeeper, if you will. She starts with a dagger that she can coat in magic, attacks extremely fast, and can poise break most trash mob enemies in this game. You give this woman a pair of Wolverine claws, and she's unstoppable. She has a quicker sidestep, dancer-type graceful dodge that felt really good to me, and it felt like some of her iframes were a little bit easier to get when you dodge than I was used to. If you dodge rapidly enough with her, you do this kind of flowing, dancer-esque backstep somersault that looks really cool. Her primary skill lets her create an after image of an enemy that slowly rewinds back time and does damage. It's a little confusing, but I'm a Moon Knight fan, so random bullshit go applies here. Her ultimate shrouds her and her teammates in complete darkness, rendering them invisible even while you attack for a short time, and is great in a pinch. Presumably, there's going to be more classes in the full game. I don't remember if they've officially said that or not, but the way the classes right now are spread out as NPCs and Roundtable hold, there's plenty of room to add more people, and the lack of a dedicated faith-based class does feel like a glaring omission. One of the most surprising features to me when selecting classes prior to a run was there's no role queue or limit on who can play what class. Want to run a party of 3 recluses? You're going to get your shit stomped because they're glass cannons, but power to you, you can do it. Most of the time, it seemed like the random teammates and I had an unspoken agreement that we'd all run a different class, but at one point we did have 2 guardians, and that was pretty sick. Speaking of random teammates, it seemed like most of the people who were playing the network test were pretty decent. We all stuck together for the most part. I got ignored a couple times while I was down, but it just seemed kind of wholesome, especially since we couldn't communicate with each other in anything other than the ancient gamer language of jumping up and down rapidly and rapidly waving your weapon in the classic Dark Souls 2-handed block animation. You can ping on the map, and the pings are color-coded based on what class use the ping. I would like some kind of better communication system, either a 4-option wheel, kind of like what Monster Hunter or Marvel Rivals has. There's no pouch in this game, so conceivably you could hold triangle or Y and map those to the D-pad, but maybe in the full release they'll do something. Let's briefly walk through what a typical 3 days run looks like in game. Day 1 and day 2, you'll just be exploring the world, running around, and constantly running from the slowly closing circle of rain that is going to kill you. If you get caught outside the circle, your health bar turns purple, and you will take some damage. It's not that bad. It's not instant death like some other games I've played, but it is enough to instill a sense of urgency in you. If you survive the boss fight at the end of day 2, a puddle of goop will appear, and touching it will transport you to this dimensional pocket that is styled very similarly to the Divine Towers or the Divine Gate in the base game Elden Ring, and it gives you one of the most beautiful skyboxes I have ever seen, and your last chance to purchase gear, level up, before opening the door to the final boss, who is the Night Lord of this realm, who shall henceforth be named Conrad, with a K, pick unrelated, and he's waiting for us to murder him. In the build I played, the final boss was always the 3-headed Cerberus dog from the trailers, and it seemed like you're going to be able to select which expedition you choose based on what final boss you wish to fight at the end of your 3-day adventure. When you're exploring the open world, one of the biggest changes is Sites of Grace no longer restore HP and FP and cure status ailments unless you level up, which is all you do at a Site of Grace. You don't rest at it, you just run up to it, press your triangle or Y button, and then confirm leveling up. You don't allocate any stats or do any thinking, and the whole process takes only a couple of seconds. If you want to restore HP or FP, you can go to a grove of Roa fruit and restore some of your health, or these magic spectral trees where you can restore FP exist. Once you've beaten a boss, they drop a little loot node. These usually contain a couple weapons and 1 or 2 buffs, such as 10% more stamina or something, and it seems like the ending bosses of each day give you more powerful buffs, such as one that I really enjoyed, which summons the Placidusax Red Dragon Lightning when you dodge. Other loot comes from chests and sometimes weapon racks around the world. The racks mostly contain ranged weapons, which don't require ammo anymore, so great bow enthusiasts rejoice. You can also find red spectral corpses of other Nightfarers that you can loot for some of their equipment, and this seems to take the place of bloodstains. There's also merchants throughout the world, and every merchant will sell a smithing stone for an exorbitant amount more than the price of eggs right now in America. And if you can afford that or have found smithing stones in the world, every merchant has an anvil where you can level up your weapons. Probably the most important thing to remember when you're exploring the world is if you are not constantly sprinting, which is now a toggle and significantly faster than any other Souls game, you need to be. If you aren't running around like a child on Red 40, you are doing it wrong. If you die during the daytime open world exploration area of the game, your teammates have a chance to revive you by doing damage. Each death increases the amount of damage they need to do. If you are too far away from your team or they don't revive you in time, you respawn at a site of grace with a level penalty. If you fail to be revived during the boss fight, you are permadead, and if your whole team dies, your run is over. Then given some relics, which are minor buffs you can apply per character. They seem to be in terms of stamina, elemental damage, attack speed, poise, etc. Pretty standard roguelite fare here. I want to briefly mention just how pretty the new roundtable hold is. There's a lot more clutter and greenery than Elden Ring, and there is this overlook, which reminds me immediately of that first overlook when you come out of the Undead Asylum in Dark Souls 1, mixed with a little bit of overlooking the sea in Majula from Dark Souls 2. And it's a nice moment of peace in an otherwise incredibly intense game. Alright, now that I've info dumped on you for 16 minutes and probably barely scratched the surface of what's actually in this game, let's talk about what I thought about it. It's awesome. It's a massive adrenaline rush every time we drop into the world, and it definitely has some of that unfinished, scuffed textures in places, but it's a beta. I'm sure the base game will be better. You can tell they were intentional when they built the map and putting some of the new steps into cliff sides to take advantage of the new wall vaulting mechanic that makes it really fun to traverse the world, and the spirit spring jumps are just so much fun to use. There's still Churches of America that give you an additional flask charge, which is really cool. There were 2 maps in the network test build, and there's been a lot of speculation of, will this be a procedurally generated game? I don't think so. I think the intentional placement of the vault steps and the spirit springs just wouldn't work too well with procedural integration, but I'm not a game dev, so it doesn't matter. At a high level, I think map knowledge is going to play a massive role in optimizing your runs, just like it does in repeat playthroughs of Elden Ring. There was no poison swamp. I am immensely disappointed from Software. The actual pool of bosses and spawn areas for them in the network test was pretty low. For example, we knew if we dropped next to a certain cathedral structure, there would always be a fire prelate in the basement who was easy to kill for early runes. I don't know if this list is exhaustive, but the bosses I got to fight in the network test were a guardian golem with a bow, crucible knights, the same dragon we have fought about 37 times by now, Godskin Nobles, Miranda Blossoms, Loretta Carrion Knight, groups of 3 flame tanks, which are now trivialized by the new vaulting mechanics, groups of Zamor heroes, groups of the bubble enemies from Leyendell Capital, and a fire prelate. At the end of day 1, I have seen 2 bosses in the network test, a duo of a demi-human queen and the demi-human ketamine moonveil swordsman from the DLC. The other boss that I've seen on day 1 was the centipede demon, and I can confirm you can cut off his tail just like in DS1, but unlike in DS1, the tail comes to life, attacks you, and it grows back to be cut again on the boss. For day 2, I saw 2 bosses. They were a trio consisting of a draconic tree sentinel flanked by 2 big Leyendell knights on horseback, and the Fell Omen, which is Morgott from Elden Ring. It seemed like the big pool of enemies that spawn right before a boss tells you what the boss is. For example, for Morgot or Margit, it was always two big omens. The demi-humans would spawn a large group of demi-humans, and the centipede demon a group of everybody's favorite spider hand enemies. I hope this changes a bit in the full release to be a bit more random and truly chaotic. Finally, on the subject of bosses, on multiple occasions we were exploring the world and Margit shows up to invade us and talk shit at us. This was hilarious, and I really hope the Nameless King is also an invasion boss, because the trailers show him in Limfeld and not the final area. Can't really stress enough how intense this game feels, where the music in Elden Ring while exploring areas was generally very pensive, contemplative music. Now it's this powerful battle music that fills you with a sense of unease and urgency as you fight through the world. I made it to the final fight with the Tricephalos one time, and the fight was pretty cool. The arena reminded me a lot of the Radon fight where Slave Knight Gale, and the way the dog would split into 3 separate dogs to attack you was really cool. I didn't think he was as challenging compared to the Margit fights, but that might just be down to having a good build at the time, whereas I did not when Margit invaded. This game really feels like a breath of fresh air from a company people have been begging to try new things for years now. Of course, you'll have the haters who say it sucks and how dare From Software change their proven formula, but I think it's quite exciting to see a company try new things, and they've already confirmed DLC content such as maps, bosses, hopefully characters, so it might be worth getting the deluxe edition for $55, but $40 seems like the sweet spot for the genre of game that I call 3 to 4 dipshits get dropped into the world and fight like hell to save it. If you're still here listening to this video, thank you very much for watching. If you played the network test or you're excited for Elden Ring Nightrein, leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. If I left out anything, you can ask me any follow-up questions down there, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. I will be back next time with Monster Hunter Wilds, maybe? Hopefully? And if it's not that, it's going to be the Hunt Showdown you all know and love. And thank you very much for watching. I hope to start getting more into this pre-recorded style of content in the future and commentaries, so we'll see how this video does. But I promise next time I'll have some actual footage for you. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe.